coming to you from the bunker now.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders podcast. If you're tuning in for the first time, this podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform. You can think of it like infrastructure for security operations. We offer a highly capable cross-platform EDR, a data lake, log ingestion, cloud connectors, and so much more. Too many tools and capabilities to list, all designed to work together. We have a comprehensive web interface, but everything is built API first. You can scale up, scale down, pay only for what you use. It's an approach that just makes sense, allowing you to reduce your costs and scale with confidence. You can get started today with the full featured free tier at LimaCharlie.io. And if you want to say hello, you can join the community at community.limacharlie.io. My name's Christopher Luft. I'm here with the one and only Matt Bromley, and we're going to talk about some of the cybersecurity news today. How you doing, Matt?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing well, sir. How are you? It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you here.
Excited to be here. We got some fun stuff to cover this week. This was a busy 7 days, believe it or not. There was a lot of stuff happening.
There's some stuff on fire for sure.
Just a little bit. Yeah, maybe some things we could share to point people in the right direction.
Oh, man, I got to get that drum roll sound effect. This one's been all over the news. Critical new SharePoint vulnerability is under mass exploitation, with attackers targeting on-premise SharePoint server deployments to exfiltrate sensitive data, including authentication tokens. This unauthenticated remote code execution, or RCE, flaw rated a 9.8 out of 10 in severity, impacts servers exposed to the internet and allows remote actors to compromise internal resources with no prior access. SharePoint Online and Microsoft 365 are unaffected. Microsoft has confirmed active exploitation of the bug and released emergency updates for SharePoint Subscription Edition and SharePoint 2019, while SharePoint 2016 remains unpatched at the time of this recording, with Microsoft advising installation of the anti-malware scan interface as a mitigation. The exploitation actively observed appears to be related to vulnerability change demonstrated at Pwn to Own Berlin in May. While Microsoft issued partial fixes for those in previous patch cycles, the new updates include what Microsoft calls more robust protections for the earlier flaws. These chained exploits enable attackers to extract sensitive machine-level cryptographic material from SharePoint servers, namely the validation key, which is critical for signing ASP.NET view state payloads. Good thing not many people use SharePoint, right, Matt?
Yeah, no, it's got a very small industry representation, and I don't expect too much. No, I'm just kidding. This one definitely I would say, just kind of dominated the news cycle over the past week or so since it was disclosed. We're once again in a state where we're dealing with vulnerabilities that were confirmed on a Saturday, of course, because why not? The weekend is the best time to do it. But as you mentioned, a couple different versions of SharePoint were impacted by this. Pretty much anything that was internet facing and was a on-prem SharePoint deployment was at risk for a little bit there. I say at risk for a little bit, only because I believe some patches or fixes have been released, but whether or not they've all been applied, who knows. But kind of everyone jumped on this one, Chris. We had CISA jump in and offer guidances towards, federal agencies being breached and what to do and how to work around it. We had some professional services advice out there, which was like, just disconnect it from the internet if you can. I mean, it got pretty hairy for a moment. And I think a lot of folks spent this past weekend really digging through what was happening. I do know quite a few of the threat intelligence companies out there were kind of confirming active exploitation all the way to, I saw weblogs, examples of the POC code. I mean, this one went from zero to hero really quick, And I think behind the scenes, Chris, what happens is there's usually an IR or an intel firm that probably spotted this a while ago being in use or in the wild. And then it was one of those like, hey, does Microsoft know about this? We can't just like say, hey, we see this thing, because then it goes widespread. But then you do have these tripwire moments where either it gets disclosed by the product vendor, it gets disclosed by a developer or something like that. And then it's wildfire and it just takes off after that. And I think we're kind of seeing that process happen live in front of us, or at least we did over this past weekend. I know you've got some more information on kind of how it works, what the adversaries can extract and how they can work through that. I'll just kind of make a mention for everyone and say that if you're listening to this and you're not sure if you have on-prem or, one of the potentially vulnerable SharePoint editions in your environment, go figure that out first and then put some controls around that. But I will offer kind of the escape route here. If you utilize SharePoint Online or Microsoft 365, you can sleep soundly this time because it didn't catch you.
Yeah. So once attackers extract the validation key, they can craft valid signed view state payloads using tools like YSO Serial, allowing them to execute arbitrary commands via HTTP requests to public SharePoint endpoints. Unlike traditional web shells, the attack doesn't involve interactive shells or reverse connections. Instead, it leverages internal .NET method calls to gain control over SharePoint internals. This results in fully authenticated looking requests that trigger remote code execution without any credential theft or privilege escalation. The technique is reminiscent of a 2021 deserialization vulnerability in SharePoint, but now repackaged into a zero-day chain requiring no initial access or authentication. According to iSecurity, multiple organizations were hit during two major attack waves on July 18th and 19th, with attackers deploying a web shell-based backdoor called ToolShell. Once deployed, ToolShell was used to read SharePoint configuration files and extract machine keys, enabling broader lateral movement and persistence. iSecurity emphasized that patching alone is insufficient, as attackers may have already stolen cryptographic secrets and enable future re-entry. Affected organizations must rotate their ASP.NET machine keys and restart the 2S, I'm not sure how to read that.
IIS.
IIS, there we go. Just read the letters. IIS, web servers to invalidate stolen tokens. Thank you, Matt. My brain just didn't like that. The U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, has confirmed the use of ToolShell in these attacks and released guidance for mitigation. The Washington Post reports that at least two federal agencies have had their systems breached. Administrators are advised to consult indicators of compromise published by iSecurity or others, apply all available patches, audit systems for post-exploitation activity, and implement CISA's recommended hardening steps. Yeah, you know the impact's got to be big when that many people just jump in like that, eh?
Yeah. Absolutely. By the way, Chris, I just want to mention you did talk about this during kind of when you were going through it. I've been a fan of the name and the kind of, I guess, like proof of concept tool. Why so serial? Takes away from the Joker, the Batman Joker. Why so serious? And I've always been a fan. I've seen it around for years. It's involved in Java, unsafe Java object deserialization attacks and things like that. One of my favorite play on words, one of my favorite tool names. We don't give adversaries credit. This is not an adversary. This is someone who actually started with like a really cool talk discussion. I just want to throw it out there. I love that name every time it gets mentioned. But to the blue team side of things, I'm 100% agreed. The most important step anyone can do here, if you do have a instance that was vulnerable for a while, those post-exploitation activity scans are going to be the best. If you're unsure of how to do that, like contact someone about a compromise assessment. Like I can't stress this enough, Chris. And the one thing that we're maybe not hitting on too much here, however, I think you're about to lead into this in our next article, is exactly who's going after this. And it is not your opportunistic run of the mill, oh, look, a fresh POC code on GitHub. Maybe I'll try it out. It is being targeted with heavy hint waves of attacks. Sorry, that was my my lame attempt at adversarial name humor, but I'll lead you right into who might be attacking us.
I might actually get a drum so I can do the drum rolls myself. This is serious. Some real players jumped in from the sidelines. Directly related to the first story, Microsoft has now confirmed that at least 3 China-linked threat actors, Linen Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, and Storm 2603, were actively exploiting these CVEs a day before the company issued patches on July 8th. Microsoft had initially claimed there was no evidence of the in-the-wild exploitation at the time of release, but a retrospective analysis showed that attacks targeting unpatched on-premise SharePoint servers had already begun on July 7th. These 2 bugs were the foundation of the exploit chain known as ToolShell, which has since become central to a growing wave of SharePoint-based compromises. ToolShell was originally demonstrated by a researcher from Viatel Cybersecurity, and the flaws it leverages were partially patched by Microsoft on July 8th. I think we covered that already. Less than a week later, researchers from CodeWhite GmbH were able to reproduce the full exploit chain even on patched systems. This suggests that Microsoft's initial fixes were incomplete, leading to the emergency disclosure and patching of the 2 CVEs on July 19th. Microsoft hasn't explicitly detailed how the new vulnerabilities relate to the original ToolShell bugs, only that the July 19th patches address the earlier flaws. External experts like Rocco Fior at Dataminer argue that attackers likely use patch diffing to identify gaps in Microsoft's previous remediation work, essentially re-enabling the same RCE vector via different code paths. So yeah, a little bit of overlap with the original information we shared, but kind of crazy that the three nation-state actors were all over this thing.
They jumped on it quickly, didn't they? I just got to say, Chris, to insert a little bit of my own thoughts here, I love that the three threat groups, per the Microsoft blog post, of course, that have been associated with this so far, three China Nexus threat actors, if you will, Linen Typhoon, Violet Typhoon, and Storm 2603. And I got to wonder what it's like, Chris. Maybe you're sitting next to your buddy. You guys are both hacking away. You're attacking some SharePoint. And then you're kind of like, hey, man, we did a really good job. And he was like, I'm a Typhoon. I don't talk to storms. Right?
It's funny. I was just thinking that they might even like have a shared Slack or something where like somebody finds that and they're like, hey guys, check this out. And then it kind of gets.
No, I'm thinking more like Discord badges, like you're a Typhoon. You dude, they got to look up to the Typhoons. The other guy's just a thunderstorm. This one over here is a Typhoon. Like this is a serious deal, But anyways, my plays on words here, hoping to diminish the severity of the threat actors, but to bring it back to reality for anyone who's listening to this and has kind of, fallen into the crosshairs or is curious if they have fallen into the crosshairs for this. These are not kind of play around kidding threat groups. These are China Nexus threat groups. These are well-backed, well-funded, and whatever their association to the government might be, they've been very successful in a lot of their attacks in the past. Hence their name and kind of the reverence given towards them from a grouping perspective. This is not the type of group to play around. If you have an organization that falls within their target list or an initiative of theirs or something they want to go after, that just raises the imperative to go and check to see what's happening and what's going on. As mentioned, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you can be sure as soon as they got in there, they were after the other cryptographic keys and just widening their footprint.
100%.
Like very hard to eject.
I mean, Linen Typhoon itself, and you may cover this in a moment, but Linen Typhoon's been around since 2012. Violet Typhoon's been around since 2015. Storm 2603 is particularly focused on stealing machine keys from SharePoint servers. I mean, the thing is, we have a lot of groups that are very skilled in this particular arena, playing the game with a largely unknown up until Saturday vulnerability. All the ingredients are there for some real big damage to be caused. So my high recommendation for everyone here is like, go and do those post-exploitation activities. I know Chris and I a lot of times talk about just kind of patch, and then we kind of casually wave away the like, don't forget to check your stuff. But in this case, I'm going to advise, Fortune 500s, government agencies, anyone else who might be in kind of serious high visibility networks and stuff like that. You need to do that post-exploitation search to see, was I exploited at some point in time? I will make a note. The other difference in this vulnerability and this attack pattern is we are not talking about something that was disclosed and then was subsequently weaponized and then adversaries took advantage of it. We were disclosed, or this thing was disclosed to us because it's already been seen in the wild. So I want to be clear about this timeline here, folks. We're kind of learning about the vulnerabilities after they've already been exploited. Like we didn't have that rollout process of vuln, patch, POC weaponized, those who were unpatched got attacked. This is, here's a major thing. Oh, and by the way, it's already active in the wild. Oh, and by the way, it's already been replicated by a bunch of people. Oh, and by the way, we already know who's been compromised, and it includes multiple high value targets. So, be vigilant in times like this for sure. Chris, I think you got a little more though about kind of how this approach works from an attack perspective.
Yeah, the continued evolution of this attack chain is a case study in how incomplete patches can be reverse engineered into fresh 0 days. The current vulnerability under mass exploitation was likely discovered by analyzing Microsoft's earlier mitigation steps. The result is a renewed remote code execution capability that once again allows attackers to extract machine keys and craft valid view state payloads. This reaffirms that attackers are not only actively tracking SharePoint patch cycles, but are quick to weaponize any oversights. According to Microsoft, investigations into additional actors exploiting these chains are ongoing, and they expect broader adoption among threat groups in the coming weeks. The appeal of SharePoint as a target lies in its role as a centralized content repository for sensitive enterprise data. Jim Walter at SentinelOne noted that beyond data theft, compromised SharePoint instances are being used as staging points for lateral movement, such as internal watering hole attacks. SentinelOne documented earlier exploitation activity as far back as July 17th, targeting sectors like technology, critical infrastructure, and consulting. This first wave of attacks involved dropping PowerShell-based backdoors, while subsequent waves focused on data collection and even fileless malware deployment. Walter warned that both state-backed and financially motivated actors are incorporating these flaws into their tool chains and frameworks. Microsoft and others now recommend that organizations immediately patch affected systems, rotate machine keys and credentials, and disable or reduce external exposure of SharePoint services. They also advise enabling the anti-malware scan interface, running comprehensive asset inventories, and implementing strict hardening measures to limit lateral movement. As long as there are unpatched systems, these vulnerabilities will remain high-value attack vectors, especially given the ease of exploitation and the privileged access they can provide post-compromise. So I'm sure this is not going to be the last time we hear about SharePoint this year.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
This is another one of those cases, Chris, where I think you and I will be talking about a breach in the future that likely had this as a point of origin or something along those lines.
Yeah. No matter how much we yell from the top of the mountain about the need to patch, there will be SharePoint servers that are not patched a year from now.
Always. But that's okay. We'll continue to do the good thing and talk about what happened.
All right. So this next one, I think, is going to be a little controversial. The UK government announced on July 22nd, 2025, that it plans to make ransomware payment illegal for public sector bodies and operators of critical national infrastructure. This includes the NHS, local councils, and schools, and aims to remove the financial incentive for ransomware actors by preventing victims in these sectors from legally complying with ransom demands. For private entities not covered by the ban, a new requirement mandates notification to the government of any intent to pay a ransom, with the expectation this will expand to mandatory full reporting. The policy shift reflects a broader acknowledgement that defensive controls alone have not curbed ransomware incidents, and a new economic disincentive model is being pursued. While the intent is to smash the cyber criminals' business model, as Security Minister Dan Jarvis put it, opinions among cybersecurity experts are mixed. Some, like Scott Walker from Orange Cyber Defense, sees the ban and reporting requirements as a necessary evolution in ransomware response. Walker argues that eliminating the financial motive will reduce the attractiveness of critical infrastructure as a target. However, others warn that not all ransomware incidents are profit-driven. Juliet Hudson at Cyberverse points out that some attacks, particularly from nation-state actors, are about intelligence gathering or disruption, not ransom collection. These actors are unlikely to be deterred by a payment ban. It is a public sector organization, so the ban, that's a matter of policy. I totally get it. I'm curious if this is actually going to make those organizations more secure or less secure.
I think it will make them less likely to disclose. Unfortunately. Look, anytime any sort of regulatory, as you mentioned here, like the intent is to smash the cyber criminal business model. I don't understand banning payments to criminal activity that's already happening. It's kind of like they don't care, right? They don't care, and you're kind of placing restrictions on innocent organizations who are dealing with criminals that don't care about the side effects of what's happening, right? So think about it this way, Chris. The UK government announced, right, it plans to make ransomware payments illegal for public sector bodies and operators of critical national infrastructure. If I'm a ransomware adversary, that's not going to make me say, oh, well, don't attack there, right? It's going to make me say, okay, you figure it out. Like you feel, oh, it's illegal. You figure it out. I'm already doing illegal stuff. This doesn't deter me, And the reason I say it this way is we already have moral standards in place that should have deterred these threat actors, right? We already have ransomware adversaries ransoming hospitals and schools and stuff like that. And yes, there are some ransomware groups that, oh, we're so sorry, here's a decryptor, blah, blah, blah. But then we have ransomware groups who just don't care. So like there's a moral line of don't put someone's surgery on delay, their life-saving surgery on delay because of your ransomware thing. And they're like, I don't care, a hospital's a hospital. In fact, that's more incentive for them to pay, right? And then we think we're going to turn around and tell them, well, it's going to be illegal for us to pay you. And they're like, I'm already steeped in illegalities. What makes you think I care about that? If I ransom your organization and you turn around and say it's illegal for me to pay, I'm going to say that's not my problem. You're not getting your stuff back. Okay.
Yeah.
So if anything, I think it adds more pressure, more unnecessary pressure on ransomware victims to, of course, not to get to a point of ransoms, but then like you're completely tying their hands. Public sector bodies, if they get ransomed and they're stuck, it's like, hey, we got hit with ransomware. Can't pay. Okay, what do we do? Like we go to the threat actor and say, hey, I'm so sorry. We're a public body. We can't pay. Can you please decrypt? It's like, what option do they have at that point? And Chris, I'm going to give 2 caveats here. Number one, not every ransomware threat group specifically targets particular things. Like it's not like they have a list of companies. Sometimes ransomware is acquired and then subsequently deployed opportunistically. Initial access brokers, drive-by downloads, whatever it might be. Sometimes it just kind of happens, right? Number one. 2, I would expect better security implemented inside of these organizations. I don't like the kind of, high position perspective of, well, that thing's illegal and you shouldn't do it, without some complementary, and we're going to regulate or codify security mechanisms to make it easier so that you don't get in these positions. And I feel like codifying cybersecurity regulations and putting organizations in a better position to stand up for themselves and to defend themselves then makes it much easier to say, oh, and by the way, ransomware payments are illegal. But if you kind of just go right towards the payment and you don't help solidify the environments, you end up with, kind of, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. And it's like, all right, well, the best thing for me to do is to just rebuild.
Yeah.
And screw it. I'll just start over again. And I don't know. I feel like this is one of those things where a regulatory pressure doesn't really help anyone. It probably is going to end up causing more procedural and bureaucratic harm than it will actually help solve. Because
more pressure in a high pressure situation.
Adversaries don't care about this stuff. You know what I mean? Like I've watched organizations chat with adversaries and say, we don't have the budget for this. And they'll come back and say, not my problem. Figure it out. You have a business operational decision to make. Figure it out. And that's the way that's their negotiation stance. So I don't see adversaries being like, oh, it's illegal. Oh, I didn't know we were doing something illegal. Oh, my bad. Here's a decryptor. Anyways, you got some more on this, I think, from Acumen Cyber, but that's my initial hot take on it.
Yeah, so security researchers also raise concerns about unintended consequences. For example, Kevin Roberts of Acumen Cyber questions whether the ban will have any real impact. He warns that it may drive ransom payments underground, encouraging organizations to pay without reporting or to route transactions through non-UK entities. Similarly, James Nielsen from OpSWAT emphasizes the pragmatic rationale behind ransom payments to restore operations and minimize losses. For many organizations, especially in critical sectors, not paying could result in prolonged outages with serious economic and operational consequences. And, in the case of a hospital, like people can die. So the new law, he argues, could end up criminalizing victims during the most vulnerable moments. The practical outcome of the UK's policy may be a shift in attacker focus, while public and critical infrastructure sectors may become less attractive to some financially motivated actors. Less regulated industries could see increased targeting. Meanwhile, elite or nation-state groups will likely continue to pursue attacks against CNI, potentially with even more destructive tactics. The policy then risks reshuffling the threat landscape without removing key attack vectors. Trevor Deering suggests that instead of just prohibiting payments, government should focus on ensuring the organizations have robust backups, recovery plans, and up-to-date risk assessments. So increase the budgets, folks. Finally, Forrester's Ali Melan calls the policy a disaster in practice, arguing that organizations usually pay ransoms not by choice, but because they have no viable alternative. The ban doesn't change that reality. If the government wants to prevent payments, it must support alternative options such as state-backed recovery funding, which is politically unlikely. The consensus among critical voices is that while banning payments may look decisive, it risks oversimplifying a deeply complex problem, potentially worsening outcomes for the very entities it aims to protect. Yeah, I wonder how this holds up politically when a children's hospital gets ransomed and they're completely shut down and the public just wants them to pay the ransom to get things going again.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was illegal. I don't know. I mean, We'll see. I think this is another one that we'll see just kind of turn into something. I mean, there was definitely a lot of controversy abound when the US SEC came out with fines levied towards, misreporting or lack of reporting or failure to report and stuff like that. So we definitely live in a world where a regulatory thing comes about, and then there's a lot of conflict that comes out of it. There's a lot of controversy that comes out of it, and then it just kind of gets put into place. And sometimes it has that positive effect, like, oh, we're going to make it expensive if they don't report correctly, or if they get breached, we're going to make it expensive if it turns out to be negligence or something along those lines. So, I mean, I would like to say that kind of helped, but Chris, anytime there's just a financial number on the line, it always just gets roped into the risk assessment, like which one is cheaper, and that's the option that we'll take. You've removed that decision for organizations with a regulatory requirement like this, or I should say an enforcement like this. You've removed that risk assessment, and now you're forcing the protection to go upstream and saying, hey, organizations, you don't want to get yourself in this position, because if you get breached, you're violating the law if you try to pay. Yeah. So, get better protections in place. And it's like, why didn't you just focus on that, as opposed to, oh, we're going to stop the attackers where it hurts? And it's like, no, you're actually hurting the organizations, but we'll see what happens.
All right. So the last one I have today is just for you, Matt. I know you're such a fan. This was in Zach Allen's Detection Engineering Weekly, and thought it was very suiting for the show given our past topics. So in-browser cryptocurrency mining, often called cryptojacking, originally gained notoriety in 2017 when CoinHive introduced JavaScript-based mining for Monero. There's that freaking Monero again.
Everyone's Monero, everyone's favorite.
It allowed websites to run mining scripts directly in users' browsers, turning CPU cycles into revenue, often without user consent. For a time, this model was viewed as a potential alternative to ad-based monetization. However, the technology was abused quickly, as CoinHive's mining operations came to represent 12% of Monero's total hash rate. Users reported significant performance degradation and battery drain. Public backlash followed, and by 2019, browser vendors like Chrome and Firefox had implemented protections that effectively shut CoinHive down. While that seemed to mark the end of cryptojacking, recent events suggest the tactic has merely evolved. A suspicious JavaScript payload from a domain, yobox.store, triggered alerts during routine scannings at Seaside. Despite displaying no immediate performance impacts or network requests, the script in question loaded silently and leveraged obfuscation to mask its behavior, initially appearing inert. It turned out to be part of a stealth mining campaign. The payload included a base64 encoded loader that ultimately fetched a second stage script from trustisimportant.fun, redirecting to yobox.store for the actual mining code. So what's old is new again, and I think they're trying to turn it down a little bit so it doesn't pin your CPU and drain your battery.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll see. This is another, interesting perspective here, because we've got adversaries just kind of fine-tuning what they've created, right? And, the same thing is still there. The idea of basically borrowing free CPU cycles to generate money for themselves, not saying they're free CPU cycles, they belong to someone else. However, this seems to be yet another instance of where the adversary is like, hey, someone shut down our revenue stream, so we're going to find a way to fire it back up. And I feel like that's exactly what we're dealing with here, Chris, is, the revenue streams don't die. They don't die easily, I should say. And adversaries were like, hey, we found ways to actually make this a little bit better. I think you've got some insight into how the scripts work and what they're doing and stuff like that. But I'll just offer a quick note for anyone here. A lot of times these kind of stealthy types of attacks happen in the background. There's so much code that gets loaded during a normal web page load these days that it's really easy to just sneak under the wire. And again, unless you've got some sort of a monitor in place, or you have a good, handle on what you should be loading versus what you're actually loading, or some other thing trips and tells you what's going on, it can be, pretty risky here. It can be a stance where the average users don't know what's happening in the background. And it's not until something with a security mindset, either an EDR tool or a browser-based tool or something comes along and says, hey, there's some bad stuff happening here, it can go unchecked for a while.
It's a really interesting monetization model, though, if you think about it, done with the user's knowledge. You can come use my website for free, but I'm going to mine some cryptocurrency in the background while you do so.
I know it's wild, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
the funny thing is this idea of lending out CPU cycles is not entirely crazy. It's well known by folks. In fact,
SETI, remember SETI?
SETI, and I was also going to mention there was an app actually during COVID-19. There is a tool out there called Folding at Home. And I remember running this for quite a while. And what it did is it was a piece of software that took advantage of free CPU cycles, and it helped to calculate things. So folding in the scientific community is running simulations of proteins and stuff like that. So there's there's actually like the idea of borrowing free CPU cycles in order to do a thing is not inherently malicious. In fact, it's used by the scientific community. It's used quite frequently. Where it gets tricky is, oh, wait a second. I'm a malware author taking advantage of doing stuff I shouldn't be doing. But the point remains the same of like that user isn't really doing much with that CPU. So why not take advantage of it? It's like, well, you're using it for nefarious purposes, unfortunately. But yeah, it's a weird stance. And the reason I say that is a lot of times it's very zero impact to the users. Now, of course, it can send your CPU sky high and stuff like that. There are definitely ways to catch it just by like your computer starts to run slow and stuff like that. But I always find it an interesting attack vector because it's not necessarily like, hey, I need to borrow your system or something. It's literally like, I just want some free CPU cycles while you load my webpage.
Yeah. So once the script was isolated in a controlled environment, researchers found that it incorporated several advanced evasion techniques. It leveraged obfuscated variable names and strings, dynamically executed code using eval-like behavior, and conditional logic based on environmental checks, such as the presence of WebAssembly support, to tailor its mining operations. Rather than spiking CPU usage, which is a clear giveaway, the script used background web workers to distribute mining tasks across multiple threads, maintaining a low but constant draw on system resources. Communication with the attacker's infrastructure was handled via WebSockets, which provided real-time control over mining intensity and allowed the script to bypass traditional HTTP-based detection mechanisms. Further digging uncovered that over 3,500 websites had been compromised to serve this script, making it part of a widespread campaign. Notably, the same infrastructure, particularly the domains trustisimportant.fun and yobox.store, was linked to other malicious activities like Magecart-style credit card skimming. This suggests that the operators are reusing infrastructure across multiple attack vectors. There was a couple of their C2 IPs, which coordinated mining instructions and resource collection. Unlike earlier cryptojacking efforts, which were noisy and easily detectable, this campaign operates on a stay low, mine slow principle, throttling mining to remain below detectable thresholds. So the campaign exemplifies the current state of client-side attacks: modular, stealthy, and adaptable. Today's cryptojacking scripts are no longer just basic JavaScript miners. They are multi-stage loaders with environmental awareness, background thread execution, and encrypted C2 channels. The goal isn't to extract as much CPU as fast as possible. It's to maintain persistence, avoid detection, and slowly siphon off resources over time. So, I'm not even mad. I think it was super interesting. And, it kind of reminds me, I'll probably date myself. I think the movie was called Office Space, where the guy ends up finding a rounding error in this bank software, and he sends himself every penny that gets rounded off and makes millions of dollars. Kind of feel like it's got the same vibe,
I've got a similar feeling about this where, so here, let's use that that's a great example of, right, is anybody really hurt? And it's kind of like, well, $1 million has to come from somewhere, right? So assuming kind of like the company that doesn't know about the rounding error is kind of absorbing that as additional revenue. They just might not know where it's coming from. Like it's a rounding error, right? So that's kind of like, what was your revenue for this year versus what was your, sales or whatever. And it's kind of like, we expected this, but we got that. And I don't know, it's just mixed up in there somewhere, right? At a high enough scale, $1 million can literally be a unnoticed rounding error.
Yeah.
And at that stage, someone could say, well, if it's unnoticed rounding error, like, can I have it? It's like, well, no, unfortunately, it's still illegal. But in this case, if a user is only using 5% of their CPU and I want to borrow 95% for an hour and they don't know about it,
or 2% over a month.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Now, I will say, for anyone who's curious, and I'll tie this out really quickly for you, Clifford Stoll's The Cuckoo's Egg from back in the 1970s or 80s started. He uncovered, I guess, the first Russian Nexus APT threat actor inside of military and collegiate networks because every CPU cycle was charged back in the day. I don't think we're there
his bill
anymore.
Was off by like $1.40 or something. Yeah, it was a very small amount, but it drove him nuts. Exactly. And he dove in. Yeah.
Yep. And he went and investigated, and he was one of the first CTI analysts out there. But this is just to make a point for everyone to say, like, sometimes the CPU cycles matter, but in this day and age, I think everyone's walking around with a lot more power than they actually need. Yeah. But this adversary, unfortunately, is kind of found this gray area where it's like, well, no one's using it. It's like it's still illegal. And I ended up coming up with this analogy in my head, Chris. Imagine you've got like a warehouse or something that typically stores import-export goods, and it has a slow Tuesday. So that part of the warehouse is empty. And then someone decides to throw a party in there. And it's like, well, you're not using it right now. And it's like, yeah, but it's not yours to use, And that's the best analogy I could think of. Is like, is it available? Yes. Is it empty? Yes. Does someone else own it? Yes. Oh, okay. Then I can't use it.
Yeah. And for anybody who didn't catch that, I think the book's called The Cuckoo's Egg. It's a book written by Clifford Stoll about this whole process he went through in discovering the Russians and all this stuff. It is really well written, really great story. If you're interested in some cybersecurity history, I definitely recommend going and picking up a copy.
Check it out, please. It's an amazing, amazing book.
And maybe even go YouTube Clifford Stoll, because he's quite a character. He does a bunch of different talks, and he's the definition of a mad scientist, I would say.
It is. And I won't spoil it for anyone. He also produces certain objects that I'll leave. You got to go read about.
Oh, yeah, right. I forgot about that. Yeah. Cool. Matt, a pleasure as always. I'm sure we'll have more to talk about next week, and I wouldn't be surprised if it has to do with SharePoint.
I would not either, Chris. Take care. Good seeing you.
Okay. Cheers, bud.